Imagine a winter so brutal, so unforgiving, that the world outside ceases to exist. Food supplies are gone. The cold gnaws at your bones. And then, a whisper enters your mind, not of survival, but of consumption. In a previous video, we had explored the terrifying legend of the Wendigo, the antlered, starved beast of Algonquian folklore that grows larger with every human soul it devours. But what happens when the monster leaves the woods and enters the human psyche? This isn't just a campfire story. For centuries, a terrifying psychological phenomenon known as Wendigo Psychosis gripped the icy regions of North America. It transformed ordinary people into real-life monsters, driven by an overwhelming, insatiable craving for human flesh, even when other food was available. Today, we are diving into the chilling reality of this culture-bound syndrome. We'll look at how anthropologists view this madness, its deep cultural significance, and whether it still matters today. But first, to understand the true horror of this affliction, we must look at the historical cases that baffled doctors and horrified communities. Perhaps the most famous and tragic case is that of Swift Runner, a Plains Cree trapper living in Alberta, Canada, during the brutal winter of 1878. Swift Runner was known as a provider, a man who loved his family. But the winter was harsh and starvation set in. When he finally emerged from the woods and walked into a Catholic mission, he was well-fed and healthy, but his family was nowhere to be found. He claimed they had starved to death. Suspicious, authorities pushed further. Eventually, Swift Runner confessed to a horror that shocked the nation. He had been possessed by the spirit of the Wendigo. He had slaughtered and consumed his wife, his mother, and his 6 children. Before he was executed, he expressed no malice, only the haunting terror that the spirit had completely taken over his mind. Swift Runner was far from an isolated incident. Cases stretch back to the 1700s, where individuals would beg their own communities to kill them before the Wendigo hunger completely consumed their free will. History holds several other chilling accounts of communities pushed to the brink by this psychological plague. In 1907, a famous Cree chief and shaman named Jack Fiddler was arrested by the Canadian Mounties. For decades, Fiddler had been a revered Wendigo hunter, called upon by desperate tribes to perform ceremonies, or executions, on those gripped by the psychosis. He claimed to have euthanized 14 people who were transforming into Wendigos, including his own sister-in-law, to protect the camp from being consumed. Tragically, he escaped custody and took his own life before standing trial, a casualty of a world where ancient spirits clashed with modern law. In the late 19th century, a young Indigenous man named Mingo began showing classic symptoms of the affliction. He became violently defensive, withdrew from his family, and openly wept, screaming that a voice in his head was commanding him to eat his sisters. Recognizing the spiritual emergency, his community attempted traditional healing rituals to melt the ice in his heart before the transformation became permanent and violent. The despair of Marie. Even early European fur traders documented cases, such as a young woman named Marie in the 18th century, who, after surviving a brutal winter that claimed her companions, completely lost her speech, began howling like an animal, and could only be restrained as she continuously tried to bite the flesh off those attempting to nurse her back to health. To understand why these individuals believed they were turning into monsters, we have to look at what the Wendigo represents. Originating in the oral traditions of Algonquian-speaking nations, including the Cree, Ojibwe, and Innu, the Wendigo is the ultimate embodiment of greed, gluttony, and excess. It is a creature born out of winter famine. The lore states that if a human resorts to cannibalism to survive, they are infected by a supernatural curse, transforming into a gaunt, skeletal beast with a heart of ice. But the Wendigo isn't just a physical monster. It is a spiritual infection. It represents the community's breakdown. In traditional indigenous cultures, sharing and cooperation were the only means of surviving the winter. To put oneself above the group, to hoard, to be greedy, or to consume another, was the ultimate sin. So how do we explain this today? This is where anthropologists and psychologists find themselves at a fascinating crossroads. The Western medical perspective. Modern Western psychiatrists classify Wendigo psychosis as a culture-bound syndrome. They view it as a severe form of paranoid schizophrenia, or a profound manifestation of extreme cabin fever, starvation-induced psychosis, and severe depression. In this view, the mind utilizes a well-known cultural myth to make sense of its own shattering breaks from reality. The anthropological perspective. Anthropologists see it as something much deeper, a psychological defense mechanism and a social tool. The ultimate taboo. By framing cannibalism as a terrifying demonic possession, the culture created a powerful psychological barrier against it, even in the worst famines. A social safety valve, it allowed communities to identify individuals who were losing their minds under pressure. Historically, a person diagnosed with Wendigo psychosis was often treated by medicine men, but if they became a danger, they were executed by the tribe, not out of malice, but as a tragic necessity to protect the collective. Is the Wendigo psychosis dead? Actual diagnosed clinical cases have vanished as modern medicine and food security have expanded. But the essence of the Wendigo remains incredibly relevant today. Many indigenous thinkers point out that we live in a Wendigo society right now. Our modern world, driven by corporate greed, consumerism, and the relentless consumption of the Earth's resources without regard for the future, is the definition of the Wendigo spirit. We are consuming our own home, driven by an insatiable hunger for more. The story of Wendigo psychosis teaches us that the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones hiding behind the trees in the dark. They are the ones dormant inside our own minds, waiting for the right conditions to wake up.